Have you ever been faced with a decision that, if wrong, would ruin everything? A decision that not only affected you, but also the people around you. If so, what would you choose? Maya Williams, a young woman working at a high-end restaurant, faced such a situation? It was a normal night until she overheard a group of people's secret conversations that could cost a CEO his career, his reputation, and a $1 billion contract. But Maya was just a waitress, a poor girl from an obscure neighborhood. What could she do to change everything? Should she stay silent and protect herself, or stand up and speak the truth, even though it could cost her her job and everything? What would you do if you were Maya? Would you remain silent, allowing the powerful to continue on their way? Or would you stand up for the values you believe in, despite the unforeseen risks? This is the story of Maya and her courage in a decisive moment. Can truth prevail in a world full of lies and ambition? Follow Maya's story and see the power of one small act to change the world. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue following this emotional story. Maya Williams has always believed that life is never fair, but she never gives up in the face of adversity. As a black woman growing up in a poor neighborhood in the Bronx, New York, Maya has faced challenges that many people cannot imagine. Her mother, Elaine, has a serious heart condition, and Maya has been the sole caregiver for her throughout her adult years. By working 2 part-time jobs, Maya has not only tried to provide for her mother, but also for herself. But Maya does not allow herself to be a failure. She understands that life will not be easy, and the important thing is to always get up after falling down. The Grand Oak is a luxury restaurant located in Manhattan, New York. This restaurant is not only a place for the rich to enjoy dinner, but also a place to sign important contracts, deals worth millions of dollars. With its elegant atmosphere and impeccable service, it attracts celebrities, CEOs, and politicians who can change an industry with just one phone call. Maya Williams worked here as a waitress. She stood there, in a simple uniform, greeting customers, serving meals with a gentle smile. But inside she carried an indescribable sadness. She always wished for a different life, not having to do this kind of service work. But she knew that, at the moment, that job was all she could do to keep her family going through the difficult days. Tonight, the Grand Oak had a special guest, Maxwell Barnes, CEO of Valentech, a large technology company, was here to discuss a $1 billion deal. The restaurant was always the ideal place for important meetings, where no one could disturb them. Maxwell Barnes was someone Maya had only heard of, a tall, cool man, a symbol of success. She had heard many times about his company, about the strides Valentech had made in the technology industry. And today, she saw him sitting there, calm, waiting for a luxurious meal, while no one knew that his life would change tonight. Maya didn't know much about CEOs or billion-dollar deals, but she knew her job was to make her clients feel comfortable. She'd learned from her mother that sometimes, in the toughest of times, you need to smile and persevere. But something in the air today made her feel like something was off. And sure enough, after Maxwell Barnes sat down at the table, she sensed a strange tension in the air. He wasn't just here for dinner. He was here for a high-stakes negotiation. At this time, Maxwell is unaware that a secret is about to be revealed. A secret that could change not only his fate, but also the fate of all those he manages. But the only person who can save him is an ordinary waitress, Maya Williams, who, unbeknownst to him, will change his life forever. Maya Williams walked briskly through the hallways of the Grand Oak, tray in hand, feeling uneasy. Tonight, everything seemed unusual. Maya always had a special feeling about things, and she could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't every day of the week that special guests like Maxwell Barnes, the famous CEO of Valentech, came to visit. But tonight, something in his eyes, in his every move, made her feel like something big was about to happen. As she was serving appetizers to Maxwell's table, a small conversation between Richard Klein, Maxwell's partner, and another man sitting in the far corner suddenly made her stop. She only heard a few words, but it was enough to make her heart pound. They were talking about a deal, an agreement that was about to be signed. But what frightened her was what they said about the secret conditions that would take place that very night. "We're ready to move things over," the man with the cocky, cold tone told Klein. "Just get Maxwell to sign, and the deal is done. We'll pull all the data and ship it overseas. No one will know." Maya felt her blood run cold. She wasn't a tech or finance geek, but she knew that once the data was gone, it was gone forever. And if Maxwell signed this contract, Valentech would fall into the hands of greedy people, and he would no longer be in charge of the company. A feeling of unease rose in her heart. Maya was not someone who would easily pry into other people's business. But when she understood that this deal could put not only Maxwell, but also thousands of his employees in danger, she could not ignore it. Part of her wanted to stay put, continue her work and ignore what was happening, but another part of her urged her to act. She had seen her mother get into difficult situations because of the carelessness and greed of those in power. She couldn't let that happen again. She stood still for a moment, her mind in turmoil. What should she do? Part of her wanted to walk away, not interfere with the affairs of rich people who could change the world with a phone call, but another part of her, a stronger part, told her to do the right thing. Maya remembered what her mother, Elaine, had taught her. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's never wrong. After saying that, Maya pursed her lips, trying to suppress the emotions that were rising in her heart. She had to go tell Maxwell immediately. But how could she approach him? She was just an ordinary waitress. No one knew her. A little fear crept into her mind. But when she saw Maxwell Barnes sitting in the corner of the room, as calm as ever, Maya decided she had to do something. She couldn't let him fall into this trap. Maya stood quietly in the corner of the restaurant, observing Maxwell Barnes from afar. She sensed the coldness in his demeanor, but she could not deny the success he had achieved. The image of a brilliant, calm, and powerful CEO like Maxwell made her feel small. But it was also because of that difference that she saw her mission more clearly at the moment. How could an ordinary waitress like her warn him about a plot that could ruin not only the company, but also his career? She was not good at communicating in stressful situations, nor did she have the power to influence such big decisions. But when she remembered the times her mother, Elaine, had suffered because of silence and humility, she knew that if she did not act, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She hesitated for a moment, wondering whether she should approach Maxwell immediately. Part of her wanted to turn and walk away, not looking back, but the other, stronger part urged her to do the right thing, no matter the risk. Her feet started walking towards Maxwell's table without thinking, her hands gripping the tray, her eyes never leaving his. She could feel the tension in her every step. Each step was like an internal battle. No one would believe a waitress like her, with nothing but her hands and a nervous heart. She didn't want to be seen as a bother, but she couldn't keep quiet when thousands of lives were at stake in a shady deal. Maxwell sat silently, holding a glass of wine, completely oblivious to Maya approaching. She took a deep breath, then gently touched the edge of his table. At this moment, All the sounds around her seemed to quiet down. She could hear the pounding in her chest and feel the trembling of her hands as she placed the tray in front of him. Maxwell looked up, his eyes uninterested, but still calm, like a man of power. She swallowed, mustering up the courage to speak. "Sir, I need to tell you something important. Oh, you must leave now." Her voice was soft but firm, enough to make Maxwell stop and look straight at her. Maxwell tilted his head slightly, his expression somewhat puzzled but also sparkling with curiosity. He did not rush to answer, just waiting for her to continue. Maya swallowed, trying to stay calm while feeling fear spread through her body. "You're going to get screwed tonight," she said, her voice no longer trembling, but still nervous. "Your partner, Richard Klein. They're planning to trick you into a deal you'll regret. I overheard their conversation. They're going to move all of the company's data out of the country without your knowledge." Maxwell fell silent, his eyes shifting from surprise to wariness. Not anger, but calculation. Maya saw a faint light in his eyes. It was recognition. He was beginning to understand that what she had said might not be empty words. A second of silence passed. Then he gently placed the cup on the table and looked straight at her. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Maya took a deep breath, hesitated for a moment before replying, "I have lost many things in my life because of silence. My mother suffered because of the wrong decisions of those in power. I do not want to see that happen again." Maxwell was silent for a few seconds. He didn't rush, but instead looked into her eyes, as if searching for the truth in each word. Not everyone was brave enough to say such things, and clearly, Maya wasn't one to speak up about such matters easily. Finally, Maxwell spoke, his voice no longer as cold as before. "I will listen to you. But I can't do this blindly. You will have to show me the evidence." It felt like a huge stone had fallen from Maya's chest. She hadn't expected him to take her warning seriously, but she knew this was only the first step in the dangerous journey she was about to embark on. Maya took a step back, but her eyes never left Maxwell. A small but important shift had occurred. He was not just listening, he was taking her words seriously. And while she had no idea what the future would bring, she knew she had done the right thing. Maya returned to the waitressing table feeling both relieved and nervous. She had no idea what she was going to do next, but at least she had done something meaningful. Maxwell Barnes had believed her, which was something she had never thought of doing. She looked back at him, sitting silently, her eyes thoughtful, as if he were analyzing her every word. Although Maxwell did not say anything more, she could feel the seriousness in his eyes. She stepped back and continued her work as a waitress, but her mind could not stop worrying. She knew that by deciding to say these things, she would not only change Maxwell's fate, but also her own. But even though Maya decided to warn Maxwell, she couldn't shake the anxiety that welled up in her heart. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "It's not easy to do the right thing, but you have to do it. Otherwise, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." She knew that if she did nothing, her life would never change. Maya wasn't a well-connected person in the world of CEOs, investors, or billion-dollar deals. She was just a girl working in a fancy restaurant, serving meals to the rich day after day. But tonight, her life had taken a turn she couldn't turn back from. While she didn't want to face the consequences, she knew life wouldn't give her another chance. While Maya was preoccupied with her thoughts, Maxwell sat there, brooding. He believed her warning, but believing was not enough. He needed proof, and if Maya could not provide solid proof, no one would believe her, not even Maxwell, She felt at a crossroads now, unable to turn back, but also unable to move forward without solid evidence. As Maya walked through the dining room, she saw Richard Klein sitting in the corner with his phone in his hand, constantly texting and talking to someone. Richard's eyes showed no worry. He was completely confident in his plan, but Maya knew that if she didn't stop his plot, it would all end tonight. She had to find the proof. Maya had nothing but a burning feeling that she would defeat these conspiracies, no matter who their opponents were. She could not let silence or fear stop her. Now more than ever, she had to act for what was right. Maya decided to go into the dressing room and try to contact Caleb, one of the restaurant's security guards. Caleb was the only person she could trust right now, and if she could convince him to help, they might be able to find some important evidence. She quickly picked up her phone and sent him a short message. "I need to see you urgently. I have important information." After a few seconds, Caleb replied, "Okay, see you in 10 minutes." Maya didn't have time to hesitate. She hurried outside, looked out the window, and sighed. Her worries were rising in her heart again, but she couldn't give up. She knew that if Maxwell didn't trust her, everything would fall apart, and without Caleb's help, she wouldn't be able to deal with Richard Klein and his plan. She quickly walked out, moving towards the back door of the restaurant where Caleb had arranged to meet her. Maya felt her steps were light but determined. Tonight, she couldn't let things go like this. Maya stepped out the back door of the Grand Oak, where the streetlights cast long shadows on the cold stone floor. The sun had already set behind the skyscrapers, and the air outside was chilly. She felt like she was walking into a storm, where everything could change in an instant. All she knew was she couldn't stop. As soon as she was out the door, Caleb emerged from the shadows, his eyes fixed on her. He was wearing a black coat and seemed to have been waiting for quite a while. However, there was no sign of hurry or stress on his face, which made Maya feel a little reassured. They had worked together before, and Caleb was the only person in the restaurant she felt she could truly trust. "Maya." "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle but not lacking in seriousness. Maya looked into his eyes. It seemed like he had noticed the urgency in her mood at first sight. Maya didn't answer right away, but instead gestured for Caleb to follow her into a secluded corner where no one could eavesdrop. She took a deep breath before continuing. "Something big happened tonight. Caleb, I just warned Maxwell Barnes, but I have no proof." Caleb looked at her more closely. "Evidence," he repeated, his eyes growing more serious. "You say someone is plotting against Maxwell and his company." Maya nodded. "That's right. Richard Klein is lying to Maxwell, trying to pull off a deal that, if successful, would put the entire Valentech company at serious risk. I heard their conversation, and I knew that if we didn't act now, everything would fall apart." Caleb was silent for a moment, seemingly pondering what Maya had just said. He frowned, then spoke up. "If that's true, we have to find evidence. Otherwise, no one will believe us, especially Maxwell." Maya looked at Caleb's face, feeling the tension rising in her. She had no concrete evidence other than what she had heard and felt. If she didn't find evidence soon, not only Maxwell but everyone involved would suspect her. She felt like she was walking on a thin line, and if she slipped a little, everything would collapse. "I know. Caleb, we need to find something that Richard can't hide," Maya replied, her voice filled with determination. "I need your help to find the evidence. We can do it." Caleb looked at her for a moment and then nodded, his expression becoming more serious than ever. "I'll help you. But first, We have to get into Valentech's system and find any calls or emails related to Richard Klein. There must be something we can use to deal with it. Maya looked Caleb in the eye and nodded. I will find a way to approach Maxwell and tell him to check his email. But we have to be careful. Caleb, if we are found out, not only me, but all of us will be in danger. Caleb smiled softly. That's why I'm here. We'll work discreetly. Somehow. They had reached a silent agreement. Maya and Caleb moved quickly. They headed toward the back of the restaurant, where the delivery trucks had stopped, and things were noisier than ever. Caleb led Maya to one of the security cars, where he would use the device to access the Valentech network. Maya felt her heart pounding as she sat in the car, waiting for Caleb to start. She couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if things didn't work out. But in this moment, all she could do was believe in herself and Caleb. How are you feeling? Caleb asked, his voice soft, but laced with worry. Maya looked out the window, where the nightlight created a hazy picture. I'm not sure, Caleb, but I can't ignore it. Caleb nodded and said nothing more. He began working on his laptop, his hands quickly tapping the keys. A soft beep sounded, as if time was passing quickly. Maya sat silently, clutching her phone, staring at Caleb's computer screen. The air in the security van felt heavy, as if time were slowing down. Caleb didn't seem nervous, but Maya could feel the tension in her breathing. She knew they were on the brink, and one small mistake would send everything crashing down. Caleb continued working on the laptop, his hands quickly moving through the lines of code and Valentech's security system. She stared at the screen, waiting, her heart pounding. Everything was at her fingertips. But at the same time, it was so easy to break if she wasn't careful. Okay, we're in the system, Caleb said, his voice calm, but not without excitement. I'm going through the emails and conversations between Maxwell and Richard Klein. Maya nodded, but couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. She could see important emails and documents flashing on Caleb's screen. But she also knew that any of them could be altered or hidden if Richard found out. A few minutes passed, and then Caleb stopped, his eyes lighting up as he saw an email from Richard Klein that morning. She didn't have to look long to recognize Maxwell's name in the subject line. Her heart sank as Caleb opened the email. The email was not just a business conversation, but also contained shady information that she could not have imagined. Richard Klein was talking to a mysterious group of people related to the transfer of control of Valentech after the billion-dollar deal was signed. But what shocked her most was that, in this email, there was a section clearly instructing on data manipulation, hiding invalid information and keeping Maxwell completely unaware. Here we are, Caleb whispered. We have what we're looking for. Maya couldn't believe her eyes. This was the proof she needed. The emails not only showed that Richard Klein and his team had deliberately manipulated the trade for their own personal gain, but also that Maxwell would be brutally deceived. She could see in the emails a meticulous plan, from exploiting legal loopholes to secret meetings that Maxwell knew nothing about. Maya felt like the world around her had gone silent. She never thought she would find herself in this situation. To help Maxwell, she would have to face a powerful and dangerous man like Richard Klein, someone no one else would dare to confront. But she couldn't let fear stop her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and looked at Caleb. What do we do next? She asked, her voice trembling a little. Caleb was silent for a moment. He looked at the screen, his hands still moving. I'll send Maxwell a copy of this email, but we have to be careful. If Klein finds out, everything will fall apart quickly. Maya nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She understood that there was no turning back now. She had to protect what was right, no matter the danger. I will talk to Maxwell now. Caleb looked at her seriously. Maya, remember to be careful. Maxwell might not believe you right away. Maya smiled, unable to hide the worry in her eyes, but she knew she had to walk this path. I understand, but I have to do this, with determination in her heart. Maya left the security van and stepped inside the restaurant once more. She needed to see Maxwell immediately. She couldn't let him continue to blindly trust Richard Klein. She knew that if she didn't act now, it might be too late. Maya walked into Maxwell Barnes' office with a strange, almost inexplicable feeling of tension. She had braced herself for one of the most important conversations of her life. But as she walked through the doors of Maxwell's large office, she felt as if she were entering a place where everything could change in an instant. Maxwell sat behind a large desk, fiddling with a pen, his eyes lingering on the documents on the table. The room was tastefully decorated with dark wood walls and windows overlooking the skyscrapers. Yet Maya could not help but feel a chill in the air. Everything around her seemed eerily quiet. Maxwell looked up as Maya entered, his eyes sweeping over her, then stopping again, seemingly a little surprised that she had entered without an appointment. Maya, what is it? He asked, his tone polite but a little tired. Maya swallowed, trying to calm herself. She had mentally prepared herself for this, but now that she was standing in front of him, everything seemed hazy. Maxwell, I need to talk to you, Maya said, her voice firm but not lacking in concern. She took out the copy of the email Caleb had found from her pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. Maxwell looked at the copy of the email, then back at Maya. I don't understand. What do you do with these emails? He asked, his expression becoming more serious. Maxwell, there is proof. Richard Klein and his team are manipulating the company's data. He is planning to push Valentech into a dangerous deal, Maya replied, trying to keep her voice calm despite the anxiety inside her. Maxwell was silent for a moment, his eyes never leaving the email. She could see the confusion in his eyes. But you can't just show me an email and expect me to believe it. Maya, I need more clarity. I need more convincing evidence. Maya took a deep breath, her hands clenching. She knew Maxwell couldn't believe what she said so easily, having worked with Richard Klein for so long. But she had no choice but to trust what she knew. I know this sounds unbelievable, Maxwell, but if you don't act now, Valentech will lose everything. You will lose control of this company. Richard is taking advantage of you, and I can't let that happen, Maya said, trying to convey the seriousness in her words. Maxwell remained seated, his eyes never leaving the copy of the email, but his expression seemed to change slightly. He stood up and walked to the window, his gaze distant. Maya, I built Valentech from scratch. I can't let an email and your words ruin everything I've created. His voice was low and a little tired. Maya stepped closer, sensing the tension in the air. Maxwell, I understand this is difficult, but this isn't personal. This is your company. It's the workers, the families you're protecting. She paused, her eyes locked with his. If you don't act now, we won't get a second chance. Maxwell was silent for a long moment. Then he turned back to look at Maya. His eyes were full of determination, but also a little confused. So what do you want me to do? Maya kept looking at him. Let me help you check the contracts and emails in the company system. You don't have to do it alone. Maxwell sighed, his hands clenching. Do you really think I can trust you now? He asked, his voice a little tired, but not contemptuous. Maya raised her head and answered frankly. Maxwell, I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to believe in what's right, because you yourself don't want to let a person like Richard Klein destroy what you've built." Maxwell was silent for a few seconds, the room feeling heavy. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'll let you check. But if I find out you're trying to trick me, I won't let you off the hook." Maya felt a glimmer of hope, even though she knew this was only the first step. She nodded. "I understand. Maxwell." And with a small smile, she knew that she had taken the most important step, the first step to changing the situation. Maya returned to Maxwell Barnes' office with a heavy heart. She had spent a long night awake with Caleb going through every file and contract in Valentech's system. But when she came face to face with what she found, it all seemed to exceed anything she had ever imagined. She discovered a part of the purchase agreement between Valentech and Maxwell's partner, Richard Klein, that no one in the company knew about. It was completely different from what Maxwell had told her. The details in the agreement showed a plan to transfer control of the company that no one was allowed to know about. She sat back in her chair at Maxwell's desk, her hands clutching the files, her mind reeling from the truth she had just discovered. She had no idea what to do next. What she had found was not just a lie, but a dark plot that Richard Klein had orchestrated, not only to profit, but also to remove Maxwell from the very company he had worked so hard to build. Maxwell walked into the room, his eyes cold, no longer the friendliness they had when they last met. "Maya, what did you find?" His voice had no emotion, only caution and a hint of worry. Maya couldn't hide the tension in her heart. She had to be very careful not to let this information leak out. "Maxwell, I found a contract that I don't think you'll agree to. Richard Klein is planning to sell control of the company to a competitor without informing you." Maya placed the file on the table, her eyes never leaving Maxwell. Maxwell stared at the contracts, his face pale. "What?" He tossed his hair back and walked towards the desk. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by confusion and worry. Maya looked into his eyes without hesitation. "You were tricked. Maxwell, Richard manipulated everything. The entire process of transferring control of the company. It was all prepared without your knowledge." She sighed, feeling heavy with what she had to face, but she couldn't give up now. Maxwell sat down in his chair, his hands shaking as he flipped through the files Maya had given him. "No way. Richard couldn't do that to me. He's been my partner for so many years." Maxwell's voice was tired. He bowed his head, seemingly unable to accept the truth. Maya stepped closer to him, her eyes full of determination. "You may not believe me, Maxwell, but look at the evidence. Don't let pride or friendship get in the way of justice. If you don't act now, all will be lost." Maxwell remained still, his eyes fixed on the contract Maya presented. There was a long pause before he raised his head and sighed. "I don't know what to do. Maya, it feels like everything is falling apart." His voice was lost, like someone in the depths of a delirium. "You can still save everything," Maya said, feeling like she was pinning all her hopes on him. "I know it won't be easy, but if you don't do something, it will all fall apart." She lowered her voice, soft but convincing. "Richard is playing a game that he doesn't know about. And now, you're the only one who can stop it before it's too late." Maxwell was silent, his eyes looking towards the window as if thinking about all she had said. Then he turned back to Maya. His eyes had changed. "You're right. If I just sit still, I'll lose everything." He nodded as if to convince himself. Maya breathed a sigh of relief. This was what she had been waiting for. Maxwell had decided to step out of the quagmire that Richard had been dragging him into. "What are we going to do next?" Maxwell asked, determination beginning to show in his voice. "We will have to gather more evidence and stop this deal immediately. Otherwise, everything will be completely controlled by Richard." Maya replied, her eyes shining with determination. Maxwell stood up, straightened his back, and looked at her gratefully. "Thank you, Maya. Without you, I don't know what I would do." Maya smiled, though she was still worried. She knew the fight wasn't over, but at least she could see a glimmer of hope. "There's a long way to go, Maxwell, but I'll be here, helping you every step of the way." The two looked at each other for a moment, a sense of understanding and empathy rising between them. They were no longer at odds with each other. They were both fighting for the same goal, to protect the company and the people within it. Maxwell walked into Richard Klein's office with his hands clenched, his eyes filled with determination, but also with worry. Even though he had prepared carefully, he knew at this moment that what he was about to do would change the whole situation. He could not let Richard continue to manipulate his company. Richard Klein, his longtime friend and close partner, was sitting behind the large desk. Richard's silver hair, always neatly combed, now seemed a little tired, but his eyes were as sharp as the first day, showing no signs of retreat. "Maxwell, why are you here so late?" Richard looked up and smiled gently, but there was a clear wariness in his eyes. Maxwell didn't answer right away, just silently observing his opponent. Then he took a deep breath, deciding not to let his emotions get the best of him. "We need to talk about Valentech," Maxwell said, his voice calm, but enough for Richard to realize that this conversation wasn't like the previous ones. "Oh, is something wrong?" Richard feigned surprise, but he couldn't hide his cleverness. Maxwell could sense the tension in the air, even though Richard always tried to keep a calm facade. Maxwell brought it up right away. "I know everything, Richard, about the secret deals you made behind my back. You were trying to sell Valentech to a competitor without my knowledge." Maxwell's words echoed through the room like a clap of thunder. Richard looked at him, but he didn't seem afraid. Instead, he gently placed the pen on the table and crossed his arms. "Maxwell, I don't know what you're talking about. Do you really think I would do such a thing?" Maxwell didn't hesitate. He placed a pile of documents that Maya had helped him collect on the table. "This is the evidence I found. It says it all," Maxwell said, his eyes determined. "Stop trying to hide it. Richard, you're lying to me, and to the company." Richard picked up the files and quickly flipped through the pages. He stopped at one page, and his expression began to change. Richard hesitated, clearly a little nervous. Maxwell noticed the change in his demeanor, but didn't want to let Richard off the hook. "We've been together for many years, Richard, but I can't let you destroy everything I've built. I believe this company can do better, but not under your management," Maxwell said, his voice still calm, but there was a great disappointment in it. Richard raised his head, his face no longer as relaxed as before. He took a deep breath, as if considering his final decision. "Maxwell, you don't understand. I do everything for the good of the company. You may think I'm lying, but I just want things to grow faster, stronger. You can't keep Valentech in that safe haven forever." Maxwell felt challenged. He looked at Richard, unmoved. "I disagree with you, Richard, and I will not let you continue to control things this way. You want to sell this company for personal gain, but I will not let that happen. At this point, Richard began to grow impatient. I don't understand why you feel betrayed, Maxwell. You think I'm doing this because I want to make money? No. I just want to take Valentech to the next level. Richard stood up, his voice slow, but full of challenge. If you don't see that, I'm sorry, but I'll continue to do it my way. Maxwell knew that this was the time to stop. He had gone too far in this game, and there was no turning back. Richard, you can continue to lie to me, but you cannot lie to an entire creative team and all the employees of this company. If you do not stop now, I will be forced to take action. Richard didn't respond immediately. He stood there, angry, but also calculating. After a moment of silence, he finally smiled faintly. If you think I'm scared, Maxwell, you're wrong. But I'll give you one last chance. Decide for yourself how far you want to go in this game. Maxwell looked straight into Richard's eyes, feeling a clear sense of foreboding that this fight was not over. I will stop all of this, Richard, and I will protect this company to the end. You no longer have the right to make decisions for me. With a look of determination, Maxwell turned and walked out of the room, leaving Richard angry. But he knew that this fight was not just about the company or the money. This was a fight for values, for what was right. And no matter how many difficulties he faced, Maxwell would not stop. Maxwell sat alone in his office, the light from the hanging lamps falling on the polished wooden desk, reflecting off his tense face. He looked at the pile of documents on the table, the exclamation points of the confidentiality agreements that Richard had signed behind his back. Maxwell's hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed on the words, not because he couldn't understand them, but because he didn't want to believe them. What was happening to the company he had worked so hard to build? He had once thought Richard was his most trusted friend. They had started from scratch, together, building Valentech from a simple idea into a powerful technology empire that helped millions of people around the world. And now, it was all just dry numbers on financial reports. Maya, who he never expected to become an important character in this story, is now the only one who helps him understand the truth. She was the first one to dare to stand up, to warn him of what was about to happen. And now, Maxwell knows that the little girl not only saved him from a great disaster, but also the only one who made him realize that honesty, no matter how expensive, is always the greatest value. Maxwell sat down and sighed. He knew what he had to do next, but it wasn't easy. He could easily agree with Richard and continue the risky strategy, following the path his old friend had laid out. But he could also do something bigger, something that would change not just Valentech, but the entire technology world they had built. With trembling hands, Maxwell picked up the phone and called Maya. He knew this call would change everything. Maya, I need to see you right away. I've made up my mind. He paused, then added a sentence he couldn't hold back any longer. Thank you for not giving up. Maya, on the other end of the line, also sensed the change in Maxwell's voice. She wasn't surprised to hear him say he'd made up his mind. She'd seen the change in him since the first day they met. Maxwell was a strong man, someone who stood up when things didn't go his way. But now, he was standing up not just for himself, but for everything Valentech had built. When they met at a quiet coffee shop near Maxwell's office, the silence was palpable, as if they knew they were at a crossroads. Maya sat down, looking at Maxwell with shining eyes. Without a trace of fear, she knew this day would come. Maxwell looked at her, sighing again. Maya, I've read everything you gave me, and I can't continue living a lie. I can't continue to let Richard run this company the way he wants. He's gone too far, and I can't ignore it." Maya smiled, a gentle smile filled with sympathy. "I know, Maxwell, but it isn't always this easy. You have to face a painful truth. Richard has had a plan all along, and it won't be easy to destroy it." Maxwell looked into Maya's eyes, feeling the determination in her voice. He couldn't deny it. Richard was not only a partner, but also a person with great power and influence in the company. If he decided to confront Richard, not only Valentech, but Maxwell's career and image would be severely affected. But he couldn't back down. He had decided he wouldn't ignore what he knew any longer. "I can't let him continue to lie. I won't stand by and watch him destroy everything I've built," Maxwell said, his voice strong and determined. "You know, Maya," Maxwell continued, "sometimes I wonder, is all this big stuff really worth it? Is everything we've done, everything we've worked so hard to build, is it worth it? Is it worth sacrificing these values just to chase numbers and profits?" Maya listened. She could sense the fatigue in Maxwell's voice. She gently placed her hand on his, encouraging Maxwell. "The value we create is not always measured in numbers. Sometimes, change starts with the smallest actions, and you are the one who can make that difference." Maxwell looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had not realized that life was not just about choosing between success and failure, but also about doing the right thing, even if it meant losing a lot of things. So what are you going to do next?" Maya asked, not rushing, just looking at Maxwell as if wanting him to figure out the answer himself. Maxwell looked into her eyes. "Feeling ready? I'm going to tell Richard that this is the end. I'm not going to let him run this company anymore. And if necessary, I'll resign to protect everyone who works at Valentech." Maya didn't respond immediately. She just smiled, looking at Maxwell with encouragement. She knew he was facing a big decision, but she also knew it was the right one. The values they protected weren't things to be abandoned easily, and Maxwell was the one who could protect them. Maxwell Barnes couldn't sleep all night. The lights in his room were still on, the dim light from the desk lamp illuminating his tired face. He stared at the computer screen, where information and numbers were rushing by like a whirlwind. Financial reports, information from various departments, and emails from Richard, all filled with shady deals he had never seen before. He stood up and paced the room, wondering if he had done the right thing. It was all too complicated, not just Valentech, but his future, everything he had built, hung at a crossroads. Maya was right. He was doing what he did to protect the company, but he couldn't deny that this decision could lead to the collapse of everything he had built. If he decided to confront Richard, he would be facing a battle not only with his old friend, but also with a system that was deeply rooted in the company's core. Maxwell could lose everything, not just the company, but also the trust of his colleagues and the major partners with whom he had built long-term relationships. But then he thought of Maya. She didn't give up. She stood up, even as a waitress in a fancy restaurant. She said things that many people didn't dare to say. And it was Maya's words that helped him realize that sometimes the value of a person is not what others see on the outside. It's the honesty, the courage, and the ability to stand up when everything around them falls apart. Maxwell decided to call Maya. He knew he needed her support now more than ever. He couldn't do this alone, and he knew that if he wanted to save Valentech, he had to do it right the first time. Maya answered when she answered the phone. Her voice was soft, but filled with anticipation. "We need to see each other." "Maya?" "Now." Maxwell said, his voice determined, but also a little nervous. He didn't know what to say next, but he knew this was a crucial turning point in his life. Maya sat in the black luxury car, holding the phone in her hand, listening to Maxwell's words. She knew that his change was not easy. A person like Maxwell, who had lived and worked in a high-pressure environment for many years, was now facing a change not only in the company, but also in himself. She felt a little nervous, but also proud. She knew Maxwell was no coward. He would fight for what was right, and that made her feel like her fight, their fight, was worth it. When they met in a quiet coffee shop, Maxwell didn't let time pass by. He walked in, his eyes fixed on Maya. They sat down, and he didn't say anything right away, just looked at her. These moments of silence, for Maxwell, were his way of preparing for an important decision. Maya, I've made my decision, Maxwell began, his voice quiet. I will no longer let Richard run Valentech. He's gone too far, and I can't stand by and watch. Maya listened, her eyes shining with pride and empathy. She knew this decision would change everything, but she also knew that nothing was worth anything without integrity. And Maxwell had proven that today. You know this isn't easy, right? Maya asked. Not to comfort him, but just to let him know she was there, standing beside him. But I believe you can do it. You're fighting not just for the company, but for the values we've built. Maxwell nodded. He looked at her, his eyes shining with determination. I will do the right thing. People can say what they want about me, but I will never turn my back on what I know is right. She smiled, looking at Maxwell as if she were looking at a hero. She believed he was ready for this fight, and with every step Maxwell took, she was ready to stand by his side, whether it was a big fight or just a fight with herself. Maxwell felt his heart pounding in his chest as he entered Richard's office. He had prepared himself for this confrontation, but as he stood face to face with his old friend, a feeling of anxiety crept into his heart. Richard's office, with its large glass windows overlooking the city, always gave Maxwell a sense of pressure. It was a large, cold space, reflecting the aloofness and power Richard had always projected upon himself. Richard stood up from his desk, his eyes calculating, as if he had long anticipated this encounter. He did not seem surprised to see Maxwell. Smiling sarcastically, Richard gestured to the chair opposite. Maxwell, I knew you would come. No one would stand by and watch Valentech fall into someone else's hands. Richard spoke softly, but with an unconcealable confidence. Maxwell didn't sit. He stood there, looking Richard in the eye, with all the determination he had. I can't let you continue running this company. Richard, you've lost your moral compass. You're not the man I used to know. Maxwell's words were like a strong blow to the solid wall that Richard had built around himself over the years. Richard remained calm, but his eyes wavered slightly. It was something that Maxwell could not help but notice. What are you talking about? Maxwell, without me, Valentech would be nothing. What are you going to do? Fight me, Richard replied, his voice starting to take on a mocking tone. Maxwell was silent for a few seconds, thinking about all that had happened during this long journey. He remembered the early days of Valentech, when everything was simple and full of promise. But now, everything had changed. Richard had become a different person, someone Maxwell no longer recognized. I'm not against you. I'm against what you did to Valentech. We were friends. But what you're doing is going to ruin everything, Maxwell said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. Richard sneered, then sat back in his chair, taking a glass of wine from his desk. Do you understand? In this world, money is everything. Power is everything. Without it, we are nothing. Do you think you can change everything with just a few high-level arguments? Maxwell felt anger rising inside him. He couldn't let Richard continue living in those illusions. He was tired of the system Richard had created, a system where greed and lack of ethics had distorted everything the company stood for. No, Richard, I don't think so. But I believe in the values we've built. And I won't stand by and watch you destroy them all for your own greed, Maxwell said, his voice strong. Richard put down his glass of wine and stood up, his eyes coldly staring straight at Maxwell. You think you can win against me? You have nothing. Maxwell, you are just someone who depends on me. Maxwell felt like he was backed into a corner. He had nothing. He knew that. But what Richard didn't know was the change in Maxwell. He was no longer the man who had blindly believed in power and money. He had seen through the wrong decisions he had made, and he didn't want to make the same mistakes again. This company isn't yours. It's ours. And I won't let you ruin it any further, Maxwell said with unprecedented firmness. Richard looked at Maxwell for a long time, his eyes filled with anger and disappointment. Finally, Richard smiled faintly. Okay, Maxwell, if that's what you want, we'll play this game to the end. Maxwell saw the challenge in Richard's eyes. But he was ready. There was no turning back. It was time to act. Maxwell sat in the conference room, his heart pounding, not because of the tension of the meeting, but because of the decision he was about to make. Things were not simple anymore. He was not only the leader of Valentech, but also the one who had to decide the fate of the company he had helped build. If he failed, not only Valentech, but also his career, even his reputation, would be ruined. He looked around the conference room, the familiar faces of executives he had worked with for years. They all had the same goal to protect the company's interests. But Maxwell knew that. Deep down, each of them was divided. Some still put their own interests above all else, while others wanted the company to continue on the right path. And then, as Maxwell was about to speak, his phone rang. A call from Maya. Maxwell, I hear you're stressed, Maya said, her voice soft but full of concern. He picked up the phone, trying to keep his voice calm. Maya, I have to decide now. If I make a mistake, I could lose everything. You're thinking too much, Maya replied, the firmness in her voice reassuring Maxwell. You've been preparing for a long time. Just do what you believe is right. Maxwell heard her words, and he knew that, at this moment, Maya was the only one who could help him see things clearly. She helped him realize that sometimes the important decisions are not the decisions that others want, but the decisions that are in line with your own values. The call ended, and Maxwell knew it was time to act. He entered the conference room with renewed determination. The executives sat in silence, knowing that this meeting would make a lot of decisions. Maxwell began the meeting, his eyes scanning each person in the room. Today, we have a big decision to make, one that will not only affect Valentech, but the future of all of us. An executive named John, whom Maxwell had trusted, stood up and said, "What are we going to do? We can't just sit back and watch things like this happen." Maxwell didn't answer right away. He paused for a moment, thinking about Maya's words. We're going to change Valentech. I don't want my company, which I've devoted so many years to be used by greedy people for wrong purposes. And I won't let Richard continue to run this company. This sentence made the whole conference room silent. Everyone looked at each other. No one said anything. Maxwell could feel the anxiety in their eyes. His decision would change everything. No one in this room wanted to fall into this awkward situation. But Maxwell knew that if he did not stand up now, no one would. John finally spoke, his voice a little hesitant. "Maxwell, what can we do? Richard has too much control. What can we do when he has taken over all the important decisions in the company?" Maxwell looked at John, then at the other executives. He could tell they were scared, not because they didn't want to do the right thing, but because they feared losing the power and benefits they had built up over the years. "I have heard many complaints about the way Richard runs this company," Maxwell began, "and I know that these complaints are not without merit. We can continue to ignore them, but if we do not act now, Valentech will no longer be Valentech. We will become a company that only pursues profits, forgetting the values we have created." Another director, Sarah, who was always reserved and rarely spoke up in meetings, finally spoke up. "I agree with Maxwell. Richard is not someone we should continue to work with. But how do we change the situation without losing everything we have built?" Maxwell nodded. He had been thinking about this for a long time. "We need a clear plan. I will personally confront Richard. We cannot continue to cooperate with someone who only thinks of his own interests and not the common good. I need the support of all of you." The conference room fell silent again. Everyone sat there, thinking about what Maxwell had just said. Each of them had their own worries, but deep down, they knew that what Maxwell said was right. If they did nothing, they would never have the chance to change. And maybe they would live with regret for the rest of their lives. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "We're on your side. Maxwell, we're behind you." Maxwell looked at everyone, a sense of relief rising in his heart. He knew that, although this was a difficult battle, he was not alone, and if he won, Valentech would have a chance to be reborn, with the values they had always held dear. Maya's story is a living testament to the power of courage and conscience in critical moments. She was not a powerful person, not a CEO or a big investor, but she stood up, faced her fear, and decided to speak up, knowing that her actions could cost her her job and everything she had worked so hard to build. She chose to do the right thing over protecting herself. It's a lesson about standing firm in your values, about never overlooking injustice, no matter how small. In life, we are sometimes faced with difficult decisions, moments where truth and justice can be ignored for personal gain or fear. But it's those choices that define you. We can also learn from Maya that sometimes standing up for the truth is not easy, but it is the only way we can maintain our dignity and respect. One small action can lead to big changes. Thank you so much for following this story. Hopefully, through Maya's story, you will find inspiration to do the right thing in your own life. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive more inspiring stories.